We're getting an inside look at the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students as the lead detective takes the stand to answer questions about evidence that the defense wants but says it doesn't have. Plus, a defense cell phone expert testifies and drops a bombshell. Thanks for joining me for Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Bryan Kohberger was back in court as his lawyers asked Judge to order the prosecution to turn over evidence that they want to see ahead of trial. And I want to be clear about this. A trial date in this case has not yet been set. The prosecution maintains it has already given the defense everything it has as far as evidence goes, and they plan to give them more once they receive it. But the defense seems skeptical about that. They've filed motions asking Judge to compel the prosecution to turn over many pieces of evidence that they believe exist. In fact, they've accused the prosecution of helping the FBI hide evidence in a prior hearing. Kohberger, of course, is accused of murdering students Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle back in November of 2022. Kohberger says the state has the wrong guy. During the most recent hearing, the focus was on cell phone records and surveillance video collected during the investigation. The lead detective on the case, Moscow Police Corporal Brett Payne, took the stand to answer questions from the defense about Bryan Kohberger's cell phone records. The murders happened back on November 13th of 2022. Police got a search warrant for Bryan Kohberger's cell phone records on December 23rd, a little more than a month later.
Memory serves, the first time I saw any cell phone records related to Bryan Kohberger was after we received the return from the first search warrant.
Just to be sure I'm tracking with you, when you say the return from the first search warrant, we're talking about the first AT&T warrant.
Yes,
Is that right?
That's correct.
And in that warrant, you were seeking 48 hours worth of records. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So if I call those the 48-hour records, we'll both be on the same page?
Yep.
All right.
So police requested records for Bryan Kohberger's cell phone for a 48-hour period, and Payne's testimony revealed that within a matter of a couple of hours, he went back to the judge and requested a second search warrant for Bryan Kohberger's cell phone records that covered a longer period of time.
Is there anything else you relied on to obtain that second search warrant to compose your affidavit?
Like I said earlier, we relied on cell phone records from surviving roommates as well as the victims. We relied on interviews with the 2 surviving roommates that were present at the time. We relied on the surveillance footage, cell phone data. I'd have to go paragraph by paragraph, but that's what jumps to mind.
Of those things, are you relying on other people's work to put that all together?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, you might be asking yourself, why does this matter? Well, the defense says it's important because police relied on those records to develop a theory of the crime that included Kohberger as the prime suspect, the person they would charge with murdering the 4 students. Ann Taylor brought up this map from the probable cause affidavit that showed a possible route of travel that Payne believed Kohberger could have used to leave the home on King Road to travel south through Moscow and back to Pullman, Washington, where Kohberger was living at the time. Kohberger's cell phone records were used to develop that path.
That one would appear to be a trail or a path from south of Moscow back towards Lewiston or back towards Pullman. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you get that now?
Same thing. It was just created using open source satellite imagery, and I think it was PowerPoint.
Did you create that?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you get the information to draw that trail?
So that was used from the cell phone records referred to me by Special Agent Balance on his interpretation of possible places where someone could have driven between the location that starts there and then back to Pullman.
So you did this on some open source mapping, not anything from Nick Balance creating a visual for you.
No, ma'am. I did view a draft report from Special Agent Balance to help me conceptualize this, but it did not look like this map.
Where's that draft report?
It is, best of my knowledge, it's already been provided to the prosecutor's office through the FBI channels.
Is this the lengthy past draft report or is it a different draft report?
It would have to be the draft cast report. That's the only cast report I'm aware of from Special Agent Balance.
So on December 23rd, are you saying you looked at this past draft report to make that map that went into your affidavit to get the second set of records?
Yes, ma'am.
The one that was given to us in July of last year?
I don't know when you got it.
How many versions of that cast draft report have you seen?
I've only seen that one, ma'am. That's the only one I'm aware of.
All right.
This path was developed after police received those cell phone records back on December 23rd. Now remember, Kohberger was taken into custody in the early morning hours of December 30th, about 7 days later. We're left to conclude that the cell phone records were requested after Moscow police received Bryan Kohberger's name from the FBI, after they used genetic genealogy to identify DNA found on the knife sheath found at the crime scene. Now back to those cell phone records and Payne requesting more of Kohberger's cell phone records.
Was there anything else from AT&T that you saw or relied on to get the second one off the ground?
No, ma'am.
And in the first AT&T search warrant, are you aware that part of the request was for timing advance reports?
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, that also appears in your second search warrant request, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And not only do you ask for the timing advance reports from AT&T, you asked for them from several other companies, correct? Verizon's version of it, T-Mobile's version of this kind of timing advance report. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. When was the first time you saw AT&T's timing advance report?
I do not recall when I first saw it.
Where is it?
To the best of my knowledge, all of that information from those returns has been provided to the prosecutor's office.
If I tell you I don't have a timing advance report or any from the other phone companies, where do I look for them?
I would direct you back to the prosecutor's office. Everything that Moscow PD received, in that realm, we have turned over to my knowledge.
But you know you've seen this report, is that right?
I do not recall if I've seen the timing advance reports. I'd have to see what it even looked like to know if I'd seen it.
Do you know what it is?
Not particularly. I'm no expert.
Okay. You wrote the search warrant though, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, how did you get the language for that if you don't know what this is?
So there's no secret that I rely heavily on people who are very highly educated in these topic areas to write this search warrant. So that language was likely conveyed to me through people who know much more than myself about cell phone data.
Who are those people?
Like I said, FBI agent Balance and Detective Mowry were probably my two main points of contact for helping me with that language.
Judge heard testimony from Detective Mowry nearly 2 weeks ago. He testified about helping with the cell phone records, and Agent Balance from the FBI, as you heard, also analyzed those records when the police received them. Brett Payne readily conceded that he's not an expert in that area, and he used information that Balance and Mowry gave him when applying for search warrants.
Is there anything else you relied on to obtain that second search warrant to compose your affidavit?
Like I said earlier, we relied on cell phone records from surviving roommates as well as the victims. We relied on interviews with the two surviving roommates that were present at the time. We relied on the surveillance footage, cell phone data. I'd have to go paragraph by paragraph, but that's what jumps to mind.
Of those things, are you relying on other people's work to put that all together?
Yes, ma'am.
Life doesn't happen bi-weekly, so why should your payday? I have a way for the money you earn to be in your hands today. It's called Earnin, and they're sponsoring this show. Earnin is an app that lets you access your pay as you work. You can get up to $100 per day or up to $750 per pay period. It's very simple. Download Earnin and verify your paycheck. Then you can access up to $100 a day as you work and even leave an optional tip. Any money you access plus tips are automatically repaid from your next paycheck. You could use that cash for anything that comes up. Maybe a dinner out with friends, groceries, everyone needs those, right? Maybe you need to pay your rent or pick up some new clothes. It could be anything, really. Using Earnin is easy. You can download it in the Apple App Store or in Google Play. More than 3.5 million people already use it. Why not join them? So try Earnin today. That's spelled EARNIN when you go to the Apple App Store or Google Play. And when you download the EarnIn app, type Crime Fix under podcast when you sign up. Again, type Crime Fix. Make sure you do that under podcast. EarnIn is a financial technology company, not a bank, and it's subject to your available earnings, daily max, pay period max, and location. Log on to earnin.com/TOS for details. Bank products are issued by Evolve Bank and Trust, member FDIC. Ann Taylor has said there's additional information that she needs related to Bryan Kohberger's cell phone records that she doesn't have. Payne said everything that he has been turned over to the prosecution, while prosecutors say they've given the defense everything that they have. Specifically, Ann Taylor wants the cellular analysis survey team report prepared by the FBI. Payne said he saw a draft report of it back on December 23rd, and that was it. Meanwhile, back when Detective Mowry testified nearly 2 weeks ago, he said that he had found some files from the FBI in his email that he turned over to the prosecution. And Ann Taylor now has those documents. But is it what she's looking for? She hasn't said. Ann Taylor's cell phone expert, Cy Ray, later took the stand, and she asked him about police requesting cell phone records twice in one day for Bryan Kohberger back on December 23rd of 2022.
In your experience with working with AT&T records, is it common or uncommon to have two warrants, one that relies on the content of the first in the same day?
It's not uncommon to see a small time period that produces results that would increase the desire, the need for a bigger time period of records. Seeing that entire process happen twice in the same day is extremely rare.
The first AT&T record, we called it today the 48-hour AT&T record of Bryan's call detail record. If you were to take that and do an analysis on the call detail record, how long would that be?
Depends on the analysis. So I'll qualify that answer with looking at what was put into the second warrant that shows us at least parts of that analysis to include a route that was identified. To do it reliably and feel comfortable that I'm accurate, at least 3 hours, and that's if you know what you're doing and you have all the tools at your disposal. Arguably, you could spend half a day or more doing that very easily.
So that's interesting. Cy Ray used to be a police officer, and he's saying that analyzing cell records can take up to half a day, not just a couple of hours. And this isn't the trial, of course, but she's laying the groundwork to say that police rushed to judgment and focusing in on Kohberger solely. And remember that FBI cast report, the draft report that Payne said he saw back on December 23rd of 2022? We've heard about it a lot. Cy Ray doesn't believe that that was available back on that date, the day Bryan Kohberger's cell phone records were requested.
It's my opinion that Corporal Payne probably is misusing some terms there. I don't see any possibility of the FBI cast team producing a cast draft report on the 23rd. I think he's probably mistaken that he saw some type of cast work product, which would be this map, before they export all those results into a report. So I believe that he probably saw some mapping through a mapping platform. It would really surprise me if there was a physical report. It would be completely out of character.
There's been a lot of discussion about the defense not having what they need to prepare for trial. Cy Ray actually talked about what they have and what they don't have.
You just told us that you think we have most of it, but there's some significant parts that are missing.
Yeah, and I want to qualify that just so it's really clear, because I understand it's starting to get very technical. There's over 500,000 lines of data that was turned over. So I'll make it clear, there's a lot of data that has been produced. I would say, in my opinion, looking at what's been produced, probably 2 or 3% is missing. But it's not the amount of data or the time of the data, it's the locations of the data. Some of the most significant locations in this case we're missing some data.
Those significant locations, have they been depicted or captured on the CAS draft report?
They have.
And tell me what those locations are. What are we missing?
I am unable to find any measurements along, I believe it's 270, the Moscow Pullman Road. If you drove the most direct route from Pullman to Moscow or vice versa, pretty much as soon as you're leaving Pullman to the time that you arrive in Moscow, we are missing that entire stretch. And if there's ever been a case that we need to look at, what does it look like when a phone travels from Pullman to Moscow? This is probably the case. We have the neighborhood around the crime scene, but we don't have the crime scene. Normally, that wouldn't be too terribly significant because if it's a flat area, there's not a lot of vegetation or mountains. You could probably interpret the same. The location of this crime scene is very unique because it sits on a mountain. Part of it is shielded by a mountain. There's a lot of other big, thick, dense apartment buildings there. Your phone is going to behave differently inside of that residence than it might on the road behind the residence or in front of the residence. I can't find any drive test data that actually encapsulates any part of the property.
Cy Ray, a former police officer, was actually pretty critical of how Bryan Kohberger's cell phone records were used in an affidavit to support his arrest on these murder charges.
This is specifically from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. on the morning of the 13th, arguably the most critical time period of this entire investigation. They mapped a handful of connections. When I say a handful, they mapped 18%. When you add the other 82%, it tells a much more detailed story. When we put the drive test data on top of that, you can get even more refined. But to answer your question on any case, that's this case, on any case, and we teach best practices. We've established best practices going back to 2008 in law enforcement of what you do with this type of data. It is a terrible practice to justify probable cause for this very detailed call detail records that give breadcrumb-like trails for individuals and then not map it. We justify an entire probable cause statement saying we have to have this. Not mapping it and then making decisions and work products with leaving that out is extremely problematic.
And now to the bombshell that I referred to earlier, although he qualified it a little bit. Take a listen.
Everything that I've seen to date is concerning to me because it's exculpatory. And I need to clarify this. When all of the records are produced and the dust settles and I have time to review it, I reserve the right to say, no, now I'm seeing everything. Here's what I'm seeing. Because of the piecemealing of the data, because of the missing data, because of data that I'm reviewing that is incredibly inaccurate, everything that is missing is absolutely in the benefit of the defense right now. There's other reports that I believe are missing that I can't tell you are in the benefit of Mr. Kohberger or in the benefit of the state. If I was contacted on December 1st by Moscow Police Department, there are things I would have absolutely said, you get this today. Do not hesitate, and especially come December 23rd. Not because of who it's helpful for, but because those documents are the only things we're going to get that's going to be able to allow us to interpret what it really means. When we don't get those documents and we piecemeal things, it creates this narrative that is very harmful for the defense's case. As I've got more documents, I'm finding it's not harmful for the defense's case. There's a lot of misstatements that have been made. So yes, to your question, to date, it is very helpful for Mr. Kohberger. I reserve the right to change that opinion in 6 months, depending on what type of documents are released and what's out there.
Wow. So you heard Ray say what he's seen so far clears Kohberger, but he did say he reserves the right to change that opinion. And he said earlier that he typically testifies for the state, not the defense. In fact, this is the first time he's ever testified for the defense. Now back to the collection of video evidence. The defense is asking for video evidence that was collected that they believe they should have, but don't.
I want to talk a little bit more about the video and what's been turned over and what hasn't been turned over to us. And I want to focus a little bit on South US 95. Do you recall that south of Moscow on US 95 is the the path that you put in your search warrant and affidavit alleging that Bryan Kohberger left Moscow going south on US 95.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And are you aware that one of the videos that you gave us, the coffee shop that they are on South 95, that leaving Moscow, you'd have to pass that covers 5 a.m. to 6 a.m.
I do not recall the time frame for that.
And so the time frame in these videos would matter, right?
Certainly.
The time frame in the videos to be meaningful would need to cover a time that surrounds the allegations against Mr. Kohberger. Is that fair to say?
You can say that, yes.
Okay. And are you aware that Kari Construction had a video, and that also has a very limited time frame, like 5 a.m., just 1 hour of video also?
Sounds vaguely familiar, yes.
And that's also south on Highway 95. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And the one we talked about today, Monday's machine that nobody could find, that clearly was given to Moscow Police Department, that's also south on 95.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So Ann Taylor is basically saying they've been given a lot of video from that route that police believe Bryan Kohberger took the morning of the murders, leaving the house on King Road, but it doesn't cover the right time frame according to the state's timeline. And it doesn't sound like she has some video that she believes she should have and is clearly looking for.
I understand that you had a lot of help on canvassing and collecting things. There was a lot to do. But as the lead agent and the lead department, is there some kind of inventory of these videos, like a general inventory that would help me know what you have and why you don't have the relevant timeframes?
The inventory that would be most useful to you is the inventory of evidence that has been booked into the Moscow Police Department. That's the inventory.
And I did come see the evidence. That's fair. I did come see the evidence. We didn't watch videos together though, did we?
No, ma'am.
And would you agree that that evidence is on thumb drives with stickies on papers that tell us different things, but not like an inventory of what's on each thumb drive?
I am not aware of an inventory of each individual thumb drive.
Okay. So for us to do that together would take some days to inventory it all together. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's my best way to try to find this Monday's machine
Sure.
and Kari Construction.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's it. Thanks.
But the prosecution says this video that the defense wants may not mean very much in the end.
Does your probable cause affidavit state that Kohberger or a white Elantra went on US 95 south of Moscow?
No, it's not.
Okay. What does it state?
Memory serves, it states that the next time, well, it states that a vehicle was seen leaving the area of the crime scene, on King Road, leaving via Walenta Drive, which heads south from that area, and then terminates on Conestoga and Moose River Drive. That's what the probable cause affidavit states.
And to your knowledge, are there other paths of travel south of Moscow besides US 95?
Yes.
Ann Taylor then countered that assertion with another question.
Are you testifying that Mr. Kohberger did not use Highway 95 south of Moscow on November 13th?
I'm testifying that there are various routes that a person could take south of Moscow to include Highway 95. There are also several others.
Which one does your map depict?
I believe the map starts well south of Moscow, more towards Genesee, and there is the line that starts there. However, I would direct you to the paragraph at the beginning of the map that says this is a possible route to travel between the two locations.
So you're just not sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That would include then Highway 95 south of Moscow.
Yes, ma'am.
And that would include other possible routes.
Yes, ma'am.
How many video surveillance attempts did you make to get video from businesses or homes on all of those routes?
I do not recall, but it continued for some time, attempting to find additional video footage.
So she's trying to pin down Detective Payne, and he said he doesn't know what route Bryan Kohberger traveled that morning. This will certainly come up later as the case moves forward. And the defense has said they will move to suppress some evidence, meaning they'll ask Judge to bar the jury from hearing about it at trial. And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.